So this is a brainchild of your one and only Danny Miller, who is only 10 feet away from me, so hopefully I'll be able to channel him well here. And basically what we're doing, we're going to get together and watch a bunch of videos that we have accumulated over the years at various camps for United Umpires and Mid-Atlantic officials. And we are going to discuss the umpire movements and the mechanics and evaluate and focus on potential outcomes that we could be finding or ways to maybe improve some things that were done to hopefully learn from mechanic stuff. And this is Danny's brainchild to bring it to everybody as a group to hopefully learn something and also to hopefully benefit Umps Care, which is the official philanthropy, the charity for Major League Baseball umpires. Umps Care is a group that helps to bring Build-A-Bear workshops to children in children's hospitals across the country to provide on-field experiences for military families, for underprivileged children, or for children with the Dave Thomas Foundation, or who would otherwise not have the opportunity to come to Major League Ballpark. We bring them down to the locker room before the games, walk out in the field with them, let them smell the grass, rub some baseballs, feel the equipment, all sorts of fun stuff. We also provide college scholarships for a couple guys every year, guys and girls every year, and it's a good cause. I think it's what, 25. Oh yeah, the infographics right in front of me. It's a $25 entry fee to get in. Hopefully you'll learn something. It's going for a good cause. I think Danny mentioned that today that we already have like 80 people signed up or something like that. So his goal is to hopefully even double that by the time we do it on February 16th, Wednesday at 8:00 p.m. And the link to register is on the United Facebook page, and we'd love for you guys to join us, and hopefully you will learn something, and hopefully we'll learn something. So,
yeah, you did great, Chris. I'd just let you know, we do have about just over 80 guys registered now, and
better.
And we've registered, and we've collected, or we've received over $1,300 in donations so far.
That's fantastic. And that's a great piggyback, because we just did our annual golf classic out in Arizona, which is the biggest fundraiser of the year for us. It was very successful, and it's nice to see that we're going to be able to keep going from that. So hopefully this will be good for multiple reasons.
Well, Chris, thanks very much for that. And I know hopefully you're going to be able to stick around for a while and chime in on some of this, but we're just going to go ahead and jump right in and
whatever
get
you need,
started.
Todd. I'm here, brother.
Thanks, man. We're going to go ahead and get started. Brian DeBrouwer is on vacation tonight. That's why, unfortunately, y'all are having to look at my mug. So I've got some videos from Brian. We're going to start sharing those. And then Chris Siegel, Chris Marshall, Donnie Smith, and Derek will kind of jump in as they see fit to help us out with answering some questions. So with that being said, we're going to start off, and we're going to start with handling situations.
Okay, we're going to talk about handling situations, because that's really going to be one of the things that separates you as you move forward in the world of umpiring. Balls and strikes, safes and outs, fairs and fouls. There's only so good you can get at those things. What's going to allow you to progress to the highest possible level is your ability to deal with stressful situations on the field. So let's talk about that a little bit. The reality with these situations is it takes time to learn the nuances to handle these things. So part of this, like anything else, is going to be experience. We do feel like presenting this simple forward plan is going to help guide you through a lot of the situations that you're going to face. So ignore, acknowledge, warn, eject. While there may end up being a lot more nuance to what you do on the field, using this as a framework is going to help you make decisions as you progress. So let's talk about each of these things. Ignore is our first step, and it's important as an official to not be bothered by the small comments that you hear throughout the game. Stuff like leave it down or good pitch. If we're responding to every single one of those comments, we're going to be inviting a lot of trouble throughout the course of a game. So we really want to have the ability to ignore some of these things so that we don't get dubbed a rabbit ears official. Now, at some point, these comments being repeated or when they strengthen to become stronger disagreements needs to be acknowledged. And that acknowledgement can come either visually with simply turning our head to look at a dugout, or verbally. Something like, all right, I heard you. Letting the people know that you're aware of their complaints and you've heard them will often allow them to feel like they're being heard on the field. And that's, in many cases, all that people want. So acknowledgement is an important part of these steps as we proceed. At some point, we're going to have to warn people that they need to stop arguing. And I would say this is the step where the most shades of gray come in, because we're going to have, an official warning, something like, if you continue, I will be forced to eject you. But then there are kind of warnings that might happen prior to that, a softer warning. So let's talk about some of that stuff. Before we talk about that, let's talk about avoiding arguments over a specific call. When a coach says that pitch is down and we say, no, it's not, what's going to happen? We've created this circular back and forth. It's down. No, it's not. Yes, it is. That's not all that productive. Now, there may be times where we have to stand up for ourselves and let people know that we're not going to be pushed around. But think about staying out of that circle of arguments where one person is saying yes, the other person is saying no. And instead, we want to address behavior with something like, hey, we're not going to do that today. So this would be one of those softer warnings that we might give as behavior is escalating that we don't really want to deal with. We're giving them the opportunity to, understand the umpire, here's what we're saying, and now he's telling us to knock it off. And that's an important step in this process. Because if we jump right to an official warning, well, that's escalating too quickly. And we don't want to escalate too quickly because now that gives them really an ultimatum that we kind of know how that's going to go. When someone's warned too quickly and they're not done with the situation, they're going to push forward and create an ejection. Now, it happens, but we want to try to manage these situations the best we can. And certainly, anytime we're in these warning type situations, we want to avoid comments like not another word or nothing else. Things that are kind of drawing a line in the sand. Because if I say not another word and the coach says okay, are we going to throw them out for saying okay? So you don't want to create an ultimatum that you can't really enforce. So something like, we're not going to do that today, or okay, I've heard you, but that's enough. Softer language gives you some flexibility to deal with the situations as they unfold. And we should always be incorporating a visual warning with a verbal warning. Recognize that your actions on the field aren't just you talking to a coach. It's you talking to a coach with everyone else watching. Now, everyone else might just be the participants in that game, or everyone else might be the people watching on television. Regardless, we want to show the other people that we are giving a warning. That way, when the situation escalates to an ejection, everyone can say, well, the umpire warned that person, whoever it is. And so that's often done with kind of putting a hand up and telling someone, hey, that's enough. I've heard you. Okay, that's enough. Whatever it is, putting that hand up shows everyone else around that we've gotten to that warning stage of things. And that brings us to ejections. So We've escalated through those steps, and now we may be forced to eject someone. So let's talk about ejections a little bit. There are specific reasons for ejections, and someone yelling at you is not one of them. Okay? So you've got to understand as an umpire that tensions run high, and sometimes people get excited, and yelling can be a byproduct of that. We can't throw someone out simply for yelling at us. So let's talk about some of the specific reasons that ejections can happen. And this is pretty close to rulebook definitions when it comes to standards for removal, so it's important to know those things. First one that we might encounter would be refusal to stop arguing after being warned. Thrown equipment in disgust of an umpire's call. And so it's important to realize that simply throwing equipment isn't enough. There's got to be some evidence that they're throwing that equipment because of our call. So strike three, or let's say a close play at first base and the batter runner throws their helmet down on the ground. We have to know, because of some evidence, that they're upset about our call before we get to an ejection for that. So don't just throw someone out because they throw their equipment. Make sure that it's in disgust of the call that we're talking about. And then visual demonstration intended to incite a reaction against an umpire, stuff like waving of the arms or demonstrating or drawing a line. These are all things that we would warn immediately to stop, and when they don't continue, and when they don't heed that warning, now we get to the ejection part of that process. And there are some times that we're going to skip some of these steps before we get to an ejection. So maybe we're not going to ignore, acknowledge, warn, eject. Maybe it's just going to be warn, eject, or maybe right to an ejection. What would some of those times be? Well, leaving your position to argue balls and strikes. If someone leaves their position, so a third base coach or a coach from the dugout, or a pitcher walking towards you to argue balls and strikes, and that includes check swings, they need to be warned immediately to stop. And so this is one situation where that language should be very clear, where we're going to tell them, don't come out here, right? And we're going to use that hand. We're showing everyone else that we're telling them, don't come out here. And when they continue to approach us, they are subject to ejection for leaving their position to argue balls and strikes. So that's a pretty black and white situation. Another one where we might skip steps is the vulgar personal attacks that are directed at an umpire. So the key thing is personal attacks, including the word you in a sentence where there's an adjective and the word suck or something like that. So you blank are terrible. That's an ejectable offense. They're making a vulgar personal attack at us as an umpire, versus them saying that was terrible or that's awful. That's not a personal attack on us. That's a reference to the call that has been made. So make very sure that we're not just reacting to a swear word or the word terrible or awful with an ejection. There's got to be a vulgar personal attack directed at an umpire.
All right, so I think there's a lot of great information there that Brian just shared with us. Chris, I saw some stuff that you typed in the chat. You want to jump in?
Yeah, I was only doing that to kind of try to help out with the screen. It was a little blurry on our end, but that was good information that Brian gave us. And I know guys wanted to read some stuff too, so I was just kind of filling in. But yeah, like we were saying, ignore, acknowledge, warn, eject. I'm not going to repeat what he said too much to beat a dead horse, but the ultimate goal, is just to handle it by not putting up with something you wouldn't put up with on the street. Someone's bothering you on the street. Maybe you don't need to acknowledge them. Say, keep doing it. Okay, hey, I see you. I hear you. I understand, but we're not going to continue doing this. I've heard you. Because a lot of times people just want to be heard and they'll stop talking. If they continue going, then they clearly have a different motivation. And at this point, you need to acknowledge them further by warning them, perhaps with something as simple as a look. Sometimes it could be just taking your mask off. By taking your mask off, that's a visual warning that they need to stop in their actions. Maybe you go so far as to hold your hand up to them to stop them. It could be something as clear as saying, hey, that's enough. This is your warning. There will be no more. Those are all official warnings verbally in different wording. And they all know that. And if they continue, try to get one more warning in, they continue again. And they know they've written their own ticket at that point. They know what they're doing. And sometimes an ejection is necessary. But try to make that your last resort. As I learned in my first year of professional baseball, the ultimate goal of every situation is to defuse a situation rather than eject, as I learned after my 5 ejections in 60 games in rookie ball. So just remember, you're human beings. You're trying to resolve everything so we can all go along and get the game going without our involvement as much as possible.
All right, welcome to week 5. We're going to talk about some of the common rules issues that umpires deal with. Let's get started. So, rule issue number 1 that we're going to look at is the infield fly rule. Let's look at some of the basics. This only is called when there are runners on first and second base or bases loaded. So first and second base or bases loaded and less than 2 outs. First and second base, bases loaded, and less than 2 outs. The common signaling that we'll see from umpires to communicate prior to the pitch that we're in an infield fly situation varies from area to area and group to group, but something along the lines of putting one finger up. Some people like to give this signal here. Whatever your sign is, so if it's no outs, it would be like this. If it's 1 out, it would be like this. Whatever your signal is, that's a good reminder to the crew that we are in an infield fly situation. Now, as the ball is hit, we need this ball to be able to be caught by an infielder. Okay, so it doesn't say in the infield, it says by an infielder with normal effort. With normal effort. So that means that a ball that maybe would be normal effort for a college level player is not normal effort for a high school or below level player. And circumstances change when we add wind or sun or some other variable that might make what would normally be an easily caught ball into a more difficult play. So we've got to take all those things into account before we decide that this ball is going to be caught with normal effort. Once we do decide that this ball is able to be played on with normal effort, we signal infield fly by extending our arm straight up into the air. That doesn't have to happen at the apex of the ball. It can happen whenever we make that decision. So we're signaling with the arm straight up in the air, and we are saying infield fly, batter is out. Or infield fly if fair. So if the ball is near one of the foul lines, we're going to say infield fly if fair. And then when that ball drops either in fair or foul territory, that would cement it as an infield fly. So another couple things to think about when it comes to infield fly. We cannot have an infield fly on a bunt. There are no infield flies on bunts, and you cannot have an infield fly on a foul ball. We're going to try to look at some video with each of these rule situations, and a great resource for all things umpiring is a website called Close Call Sports. They also have a YouTube channel under the same name. I would suggest going and looking at any of the videos they post. There's a lot of good information, especially about rules, that will help you as you're learning the ins and outs of the rules. So let's take a look at an infield fly situation. We have a ball popped up, and again, this does not have to be within the infield. It has to be played with normal effort by an infielder. So as we see this infielder settling under the ball, we're going to decide that this is in fact an infield fly because there are runners on first and second and less than 2 out. Now, something important to note, that as this ball is dropped, we need to confirm that we have signaled infield fly, and we're going to say that the batter is out. So we're letting everyone know that the batter is out. And you can do that by saying, he's out, he's out, he's still out, which would be the umpire school mechanic that we would see. So here we have John Tumpain, Major League umpire, making it clear what his signal was. He's telling everyone, I have the infield fly, and the batter is out. So having this clarity of your signals to make sure that people understand will really help when it comes to umpiring the game. Remember that your signals are the way that you're communicating your calls to everyone that's watching. So make sure your signals are practiced and clear, and that way there will be no confusion when you signal infield fly and the batter is still out.
All right, so just real quick there, Brian made some great points. Chris, I saw once again you were typing some stuff in. What you got there?
No, I was just my big point here. I love this video because first of all, Tom's a fantastic umpire, and after having taught at umpire school myself and seeing the way he handled this, really the biggest thing here is you got to remember that on the field, we are the leaders on the field. Whether or not they want to acknowledge it, we are. And somebody needs to be in charge, and somebody needs to be assertive, and somebody needs to right the ship when the weird stuff happens, which in this case was a weird situation where weird stuff happened. And this is a fantastic job by Tump and a great demonstration on how you need to be assertive and demonstrative with your mechanics, because your actions and your behavior on the field actually lead to your believability with confidence and knowing what you're doing. Because, who was that, Mookie or no, Devers or whoever was at second base? Obviously, he didn't like the call that Tump was making. And to be fair, it's a rare call, so I'll give him the benefit of the doubt that he may not have understood what the ruling was. And he clearly was upset about it, but they got out of that very quickly because of how confident that John was in his mechanics and also how correct he was. It was a fantastic job on his part. And it's how everything should be in all of your mechanics when you're out there on the field. Always just confidence, know what you're doing, and if you're going to go down the fire, let it be a blaze. Sometimes we're going to be wrong, but be confidently wrong, if that makes any sense.
Absolutely makes a lot of sense. One of the big things, this goes back to a lot of stuff Brian's talked about through the last 4 weeks of pre-gaming this stuff, making sure that you understand the signals that you and your partner are working with. So everybody on the field and everybody on the crew knows what the situation is. Chris, let's see you sliding in there. What you got?
There's not a whole lot to say after sitting next to this guy, the way he broke this down, but I'll just echo some of the same things, whether it's infield fly or any other situation on the field. Be confident in your call, be confident in your judgments, and make sure that you present that and you don't give anyone any doubt or any reason to question you. That's really the biggest piece of advice I could give in this situation, or really anything that you call or any rule interpretation out there. Just be confident, project that.
All right, perfect. So we're going to move on to this next video. All right, and here we go. So we're going to talk about runner's lane.
Let's talk about the runner's lane and runner's lane violations. The batter runner must run inside the runner's lane on the way to first base. And if their position outside the runner's lane interferes with the player at first base fielding the throw, then that batter runner is out and all runners return. If the batter runner runs inside the runner's lane, they are allowed to exit that runner's lane on their last step or stride in order to touch first base. Now, this is a good time to talk about the importance of knowing what your rule set says. Federation, high school, NCAA, and professional baseball rules will vary slightly from rule to rule. This is a good example of that because the NCAA runner's lane rule also punishes the batter runner if the umpire decides that their position outside the lane interferes with the thrower, not just the receiver of the throw. So make sure you get into your specific rule book. These are just going to be guidelines that are more general. So let's take a look at where the runner's lane exists. And that runner's lane is that secondary line in foul territory that runs the last half of distance towards first base. So it should be 45 feet long and 3 feet wide. That's the rule book definition of the runner's lane. So let's watch this play and ask ourselves if this is a violation. This runner is legally inside the lane. The lane includes both lines. So if you are stepping on the foul line or on the runner's lane line, you are considered to be in the runner's lane. Now what we're going to see is this runner who had established himself as legally positioned is going to exit the runner's lane on their last step or stride to reach first base, and that is going to be forgiven by rule. So because that runner was legal as they were moving down the first base line, they're allowed to leave the runner's lane on their last step or stride. So what we're going to see here is a slightly different version of this play. Let's take a look at the runner's progression to first base in this instance. And we can see that this runner never legally establishes themselves inside that runner's lane, and this means that that last step or stride near first base is not going to be forgiven. So because they never enter the runner's lane legally, when this happens, we're going to penalize this runner for being out of the runner's lane and interfering with the, in this case, first baseman's opportunity to field this ball.
So for runner's lane, a lot of times with rules, it's important to understand the history behind the rules because that will help you to understand and explain the rules when issues come about. So Brian just discussed the runner at first base being in fair territory, so it's important that we understand why that is an issue. Back when the field was first laid out, the first and third base used to be bisected by the foul line. So the first base foul line actually went halfway through first base. The third base foul line went halfway through third base. So half the base is in fair territory and half the base is in foul territory, which actually prompts a very interesting trivia question because the 90 feet was measured to the middle of the base. And in the 1910s or 20s or whenever the heck they did it, they actually moved first and third base entirely into fair territory, and then they moved first and third base forward towards home plate so that they measured the 90 feet to the back of the base rather than the middle of the base, but they never touched second base. So technically, a baseball field is not a perfect square. So for you nerds out there, you're going to run a trivia question one day because of that information. It's relevant to the runner's lane, though, because when first base was half in fair territory and half in foul territory, it was simple to have a runner's lane and require runners to run in the runner's lane for the last half of the distance from home to first because the runner's lane was in foul territory and half the base was in foul territory. So if the runner was touching the base when he touched first base, he could still be in foul territory and not be violating the rule. The problem is when they created the new layout of the field and moved first base entirely into fair territory, they didn't have a way to also take care of the runner's lane with that adjustment. So the way that they came up with a resolution to this situation was they created a rule interpretation where as long as the runner, for instance, in that first video is running legally within the runner's lane for the last half of the distance from home to first, then by rule, he is allowed to take that last step or two into fair territory because it is physically impossible to touch first base without entering fair territory because first base is in fair territory. So that's why in that first video you saw, even though he got hit by a throw that could have retired him and interfered with the first baseman's ability to catch the ball, because he was running legally within the baseline for the last half of the way from home to first, that was not interference. However, in the Trey Turner situation that she showed, or that Brian showed in the second video, he was running in fair territory the entire way from home to first. So if technically he is violating the rule because he never ran within the runner's lane, and because of that, he is not allowed the ability to return to fair territory, because you can't return to fair territory if you've been running in fair territory the entire way. So in that situation, that's why he is not granted that option and is called out for the interference. That's all I got, Todd.
Absolutely great stuff. Got a history lesson tonight also. So we're going to start back with this next video here on base awards. And here we go.
Let's look now at awarding bases. So when a ball goes out of play, how do we award bases, and how many bases do those runners get? Well, if it's the first play by an infielder, so we have a ground ball to any one of the infielders, and that ball is subsequently thrown out of play, all runners are going to be awarded 2 bases from the time of the pitch. 2 bases from the time of the pitch. This is the case unless all runners, including the batter runner, have advanced at least 1 base. So if somehow we have a throw that happens so late that all of the runners, including the batter runner, have already advanced 1 base by the time that throw leaves the fielder's hand, then those runners would be awarded 2 bases from the time of the throw. And so now you'd have a batter runner awarded 3rd base instead of 2nd base. Now another situation is on a second play by an infielder or a throw from an outfielder. Those awards are always going to be 2 bases from the time of the throw. So if we have a double play that's being turned by the infield, the ball gets flipped to second base, and then that throw from second to first goes out of play, that base award will now be 2 bases from the time of the throw. We also deal with pitched balls going out of play. A pitched ball will be 1 base from the time of the pitch unless that ball is subsequently contacted by a fielder who knocks it out of play when it otherwise wouldn't have gone out of play, which is honestly one of the weirdest rules we have. So if a ball bounces back towards the backstop, the catcher attempts to retrieve it and subsequently kicks the ball or otherwise makes contact with the ball, we now have a 2 base award still from the time of the pitch. We also have a pitcher throwing the ball out of play from the pitcher's plate. So this would be a move to first or third base. I suppose also to second base if somehow the pitcher threw the ball out of play from there. But if that move is a direct step to a base, it's 1 base from the time of that throw. If the pitcher legally disengages prior to the throw, it will be 2 bases. And an important distinction here is legally disengaging means stepping off completely prior to the throw being made. So sometimes pitchers end up with their foot off the rubber as part of their move to first base. You can imagine a right-handed pitcher doing a turn to first base. Sometimes their foot leaves the rubber. That is not legally disengaging, which means if that ball was thrown out of play, then we would have a 1 base award. Legally disengaging means stepping backwards off the pitcher's plate prior to any other movement. When that happens and the ball is thrown out of play, we now have a 2 base award. An important phrase with all of these awards is the last legally occupied base. So the last legally occupied base for that runner is when they're given the award.
Chris, what have you got on awarding bases?
Really, the biggest thing I can offer here is it's really important. Like, we take for granted a lot of the non-action calls that we make as umpires. And this is a really good example of a non-action call because you need to know what runners have touched what bases whenever throws are made. And it like that can go to replay for us. That's how big a deal it is if it comes down to it. Like we had a question in the chat here that if the right fielder throws the ball to first, it depends on if the batter runners reach first base or not. If he's rounded first base, then it would be two pitches time of throw. It'd be 2 bases time of throw, and he would get third base. If he hasn't rounded first base, then he would get second base because it'd be 2 bases time of throw or 2 bases time of pitch. And there's only one way to know that, by knowing if that runner has touched the base by the time that throw is made. So that we're always umpiring stuff, even if we don't have a play with the ball. What's the order is what? Fair, foul, catch, no catch, plays with the ball, plays away from the ball, right? So plays away from the ball are very important as well. You're always doing something on the field. And it's always good to know and be aware of definitions of time of pitch versus time of throw and how that works. Like, for instance, if there's a ground ball in the infield, it could be time of throw versus time of pitch, even though it's the first throw by an infielder. If, say, you have a situation where second baseman dives for a ball, it bounces off his glove, he has to get up and chase it, he picks up and throws to first, and when he throws the ball to first base, at the time he throws the ball, because of the timing of that play, the batter runner has already rounded or has already touched first base and passed it. Well, in that situation, even though it's the first play by an infielder, every runner has advanced 1 base at the time of throw, so now it becomes a situation of time of throw. So let's say there'd been a runner on first base at the beginning of that play and who got the second. Now he would score because it would be 2 bases time of throw versus going to third if it was 2 bases time of pitch. So these are all things that we need to really be focused on. You can never lose your focus on the field. We have a supervisor, Ed Rep 1, who always used to tell us when we were going up and down, don't let your guard down. This is a great example of not letting your guard down, because there is always something to focus on when you're out there working.
Great advice, great insight there. So we're going to move on to this next video of hit by pitch.
Hit by pitch rules and situations. So let's dive right in and say right off the top that the hands are not part of the bat. So there's a lot of these phrases that coaches and players use. And if you come to umpiring from that background, you've probably heard someone say the hands are part of the bat. We need to clarify that for all of our new umpires and say that the hands are in fact part of the hitter. The bat is the bat. So if a pitched ball strikes the hand of the hitter, that hitter, unless some other things happen, is going to be awarded first base. Let's talk about some of the other things that might happen. And that gets us to kind of asking this question: does the ball hit the batter, or does the batter hit the ball? So when it comes to keeping a batter in the box because they leaned into the pitch, ask yourself this question: did the ball go towards the batter and hit the batter, or did the batter lean towards the ball and hit the ball? If a batter leans into the pitch, they are not entitled to first base. They're going to be held in the box, and the ball is dead because it did strike the batter. Now, in some rule sets, it's going to be called a strike regardless of its location. So make sure that you understand what your rule set is. But in all rule sets, if a batter is struck by a pitch that is in the strike zone, the pitch is a strike and the ball is dead. Another dead ball strike would occur if a batter is hit by a pitch when they swing at it. That pitch is a strike, and again, the ball is dead. So this is going to be a situation where we see a batter leaning towards a pitch. So asking that question of, did the ball hit the batter or did the batter hit the ball? When we see this batter moving towards this pitch, we should be saying, no, you stay here. And given that this pitch was also in the strike zone, that would mean that it's going to be called a strike. This batter hit this ball. The ball did not hit the batter.
Chris, what do you have to add to hit by pitch?
it's a weird scenario because this is developed into a college thing, and I don't mean that in a derogatory sense, but it kind of blows my mind how many times I've seen college players stick their elbows out to try to get hit with the ball. I've seen it a handful of times in games that I work, but I just, man, you're cheating. Like, don't let them cheat. If they stick their arm out there, that little chicken wing, like, sorry, dude, you're staying here. And if you're upset about it, fine. It's not the first guy that's been upset at me. But you can't stick your arm out and get hit with a pitch. Like, it's just that simple. It blows my mind and you know what it is? It's because we're providing so much plastic protective equipment to players now, so they're not afraid of getting hit by pitches. So it's a change in the concept of the games from over the years. Like, that used to be a huge thing for pitchers, they could throw inside and really create an intimidation factor, like Don Drysdale or someone like that. Like, they were able to be effective because of that. Now we're putting Superman out there, or Iron Man, or whatever you want to call him, out there hitting in the box, and they're not afraid of anything. And they're like, oh, okay, go and hit me. So they stick their arm out. No, we're not going to let you cheat. Bob Gibson, great example, Norm. I mean, you just nip it in the bud whenever you can.
All right, sounds great. We're going to move on to Balks. And the one thing that I just want to warn everyone about here with this is, really be aware of what rule set you're playing under. Brian's going to mention it in the video, but make sure that you understand if you're working in National Federation or NCAA or OBR in some cases, make sure you understand what rule set you're working under before calling a ball.
All right, let's talk about balks. There's a lot of bad information out there when it comes to the pitcher balking and the penalties associated with it. So, to find out what a balk is, go ahead and look in your rule book. It would take us a very long time to discuss all of the different ways a pitcher can balk. What we are going to do is talk about some of the ways that a pitcher is not going to balk. That's where the misinformation comes in. A balk is not the pitcher doing something different from previous pitches or moves to a base. So this is something that I hear all the time. He did something different. Doing something different is not a balk. You could do something different on every single pitch or every single pickoff of the game as long as all of those things were legal. Once you do one thing that's illegal, now it becomes a balk. The pitcher deceiving a runner or a hitter is not a balk. Okay, don't use a phrase like he deceived the runner. Use specific rulebook terminology like he did not make a legal step or he started and stopped. Whatever the violation was for, use that specific terminology, not something like the pitcher deceived the runner or the hitter. That is not a balk by itself. So on a balk, when a pitch immediately follows, if the batter and all runners advance one base, the balk is ignored. So this is similar to our catcher's interference situation. Also similar to that is that on a balk, when a move to a base immediately follows, all runners advance one base, then the balk is ignored. So if the pitcher turns to throw to first base and balks while doing so, but then throws the ball away, and all of the runners on base advance at least one base, that balk is ignored. What's important to remember is that if it's not a pitch to the hitter, then the hitter can't advance. So some people get stuck thinking that the hitter always has to advance for the balk to be ignored. The hitter only has to advance if it's a pitch to the hitter. If it's a move to a base and all runners advance, then we ignore the balk. Now, runners may advance beyond the base that they're awarded at their own risk. So in those situations where the ball gets thrown away, if the runners want to continue to advance, they can do so, but they can also be put out when that happens. So time on balks is an important thing to be on top of, and there's a trap out there where we call time too quickly in balk situations. So because some rule sets say that a balk is immediately dead, umpires get very comfortable saying, time, that's a balk, when really what we should be doing is saying, that's a balk, and then calling time when it's appropriate. So if you find yourself in high school level baseball games where balks are dead immediately, make sure we're thinking about our mechanics there so that when you progress to college baseball, you're not calling time on balks when there shouldn't be time. And a situation that would reveal that would be if the ball is not secured immediately by the defense, then the play needs to be allowed to unfold to completion. So the play is not over if the ball is thrown away by the pitcher, whether it's on a pitch or a pickoff move.
Chris, you got anything to add to the balk situation here?
Biggest thing to remember, if one guy on the crew calls a balk, everybody calls a balk. So if Chris over here calls a balk,
That's a balk.
That's a balk. I'm going to echo him because we are going to sell it with our confidence as a crew. It's a lot more believable if everybody on the crew calls it versus just one guy. Now, let's say Chris calls a balk and I echo it and I have no clue what the heck the pitcher did that caused the balk, and they start asking me. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to look at, hey, he balked. He balked. And I'm going to cut, hey, Chris, he balked. And hopefully Chris is going to jump in there. No step. Or he broke, start and stop, something, whatever the case may be, because there are certain balks that are going to be better. Listen, nowhere in the rule book does it say only one umpire can call certain kind of balks. And that being said, unwritten rules, there are certain balks that certain umpires shouldn't be calling. And that's all based upon your angle on the field. I'm not going to get into specifics on that because you'll figure that out as you're moving on, but just keep that in mind. Also, to combine what we just talked about with Brian's awarding of bases, or video that he just showed before that, remember, it is very important. Let's say you're the two-man umpire system, the plate guy. This is why it's important for the plate umpire in a two-man umpire system to keep his focus on the pitcher and not look to first base as the pitcher throws to first base, which is something that we tell guys all the time, because the natural tendency is as a pitcher throws to first base, they always turn their head and look at first base. It's important to keep your eyes on that pitcher, one, to make sure he doesn't balk, but two, it's very relevant. Did the pitcher step off the rubber before he threw it, or did he throw it directly from the rubber? Why is that important? If he threw it directly from the rubber and he throws it out of the play, it's one base. If he stepped off the rubber and throws it out of the play, it's two bases. And there's only really one guy in the field that can know that, and that's the plate umpire, because especially in the two-umpire system, the base umpire is going to be stepping out towards the 45-foot line, turning and squaring himself to first base and focusing on that play on the batter, on the runner at first as he dives back into first base. And his focus is not going to be on whether or not that bat or the pitcher stepped off the rubber or didn't step off the rubber prior to throwing that ball to first base. So it's important to two things: know the status of the pitcher when he throws the ball. Did he step off the rubber or not? So is he a pitcher or is he an infielder? And also, if somebody else on that crew calls a balk, you're echoing it whether or not you saw it, because you echoing it makes your partner's call that much stronger and that much more correct and believable in the eyes of the people on the field.
Once again, great stuff. We're all working together out there. So, all right, we're going to move on now to catcher's interference.
Okay, moving on to catcher's interference now. This is when a catcher interferes with the batter's ability to swing at a pitch. This is not just with contact. So, of course, if the catcher's glove makes contact with the bat, we would have catcher's interference. It can also happen with the catcher stepping out in front of the plate. So this would occur maybe on a pitch out or a steal of home. So if the catcher catches this pitch before the batter has a chance to swing at it, that would be interference. And an important note there is we don't need a swing by the batter in those situations for there to be interference. This could also happen verbally. So at the lower levels of baseball, if you have a catcher that's distracting the hitter by saying something as the pitch is imminent, that is catcher's interference, and it should be penalized appropriately. So let's talk about those penalties. If the batter
and all of the runners advance at least one base, the interference is disregarded. So the catcher interferes with the batter and the ball is put into play by the batter. If everybody advances at least one base, the interference is disregarded. If not, if all runners, including the batter runner, don't advance at least one base, we assess the penalty, and that penalty is the batter is awarded first base. All other runners return to their bases unless they're forced to advance or they were stealing on the pitch. So if we have a runner on first base and catcher's interference, after the play concludes, we're going to give the batter runner first base, which forces the runner from first to second. Now, the defense has the option to take either the result of the play or the penalty. This means it is very important to let the play unfold to completion before calling time. We have to let this play unfold because the defense may want to take the result of the play rather than the penalty. So the way we would do this, we signal that's interference, we let the play unfold, and now we're going to say time, batter, you get first, and all the other appropriate awards would be given. If at that point the defense wants to take the result of the play, they need to tell you that. We can change the result of that play and allow them to take the play as it happened. So let's take a look at some catcher's interference plays. Here we have a pretty simple one where we see the glove come off. And it's important to note that this ball is alive. This ball is alive and in play until this play concludes. Okay, another one where it's more subtle. We're going to see the umpire signaling that's interference. And because this was a foul ball, we can then award the base appropriately right away. We don't need to wait on a foul ball because the ball's not in play. So only when the ball is in play are we waiting to assess the catcher's interference penalty until after the action concludes. A signal that we would give after the fact in order to help everyone understand that we're dealing with catcher's interference. So like I said, we're going to signal the catcher's interference by pointing at it, and then we award the penalties. And when we turn back around, we can tell the press box that we had catcher's interference by signaling this tipping motion. And that tells them that we're dealing with a catcher's interference situation, and that's why we have what we have.
All right, Todd, let's have some fun.
Have at it.
This is something that I never thought about until I went to umpire school, and then we started teaching it, and it blows people's minds when we would demonstrate it and do it. Here's our situation. We have a run on third base with nobody out. No, you know what? Let's make it one out. We'll really jack this up. Runner on third base with one out. Okay? The batter swings, hits the catcher's glove, and hits a fly ball to left field. The plate umpire properly points and says, that's interference. The ball is clearly still alive and in play, though, right? Because he hit the ball into play. It's a fly ball to left field. The runner from third base leaves early before the ball is caught by the left fielder, runs home, and beats the throw to the plate. So he scores. Hopefully you guys are with me. However, because the batter did not advance a base, even though the runner from third scored, the plate umpire now has to come out and enforce the interference because not all runners and the batter runner advance at least one base. So the plate umpire now comes out, calls time, walks out in front of the plate, points at the catcher, says, that's interference, sends the runner who just scored on probably a really close play that may have gone to replay, ironically, Hey, great, you used your challenge, but we're sending them back anyway. You back to third, batter, first base. So now we've got first and third. So now here's the situation where there were some questions in the chat. The offensive manager, rightly, is going to come out and say, wait a minute, you just took a run off the board. My guy scored. What's going on? So I'm going to look at it and say, you want the run to score? Notice I didn't say you want to take the option. You have an option. Let me tell you about how the rule book works. I'm going to quote the rule book to you. That's not my job. My job is not to tell him how to do his job. All I'm going to do is ask him, do you want the run to score? Which is code for, do you want to take your option? And the manager, very likely, as Lance Barrett said for 10 years in umpire school that I heard in his southern drawl of, I want my run. He would then say, yes, I want the run to score. So now as the plate umpire, that means when the offensive manager says I want the run to score, I am now taking the option. So the plate umpire is going to enforce the option, which means after he just sent the guy back to third and sent the batter to first, now he is going to point to the runner at third and say, you score. Eladio, timing and umpiring. Wait, you're getting ahead of me. You're going to point the runner from third and say, you score. And then you're going to point at the batter and say, you're out, because by taking the option, the offensive manager is taking the result of the play. Now the defensive manager is excited because the offensive manager fell into the trap, and he's going to say, hey, he left early, appeal third. Well, there's been no next pitch, there's been no next play, and there's been no next attempted play. So legally, they can still appeal third. So you throw the ball to third, and the plate umpire rightfully says, he's out, no run scores. So now here comes offensive manager again. Hey, I want my run. What's going on? I want to, you know what? I want the catcher's interference. Put him back at third. I want to get him to score. Here's the problem. You can only take the option one time. So you're going to tell him, sorry, you should have known your guy left early before he took the option. They just appealed. He's out, and there ain't nothing you can do about it. So that's a double play. And then you got to circle the wagons and have some fun, and you're probably going to be doing that whole ignore, acknowledge, warn, eject thing in super fast motion that we talked about at the beginning of the conversation. But it's a fun one that no one ever really knows what's going on. I've had to do that once in my entire career. I couldn't believe it happened. I did it so many times in umpire school. It happened in a game in Sacramento when I was in AAA. And I had it happen. I go, oh, my God, this is happening. So there you go. There's my fun catch interference story.
Let's talk about batter's interference. Batter's interference occurs when a batter interferes with a catcher's attempted play by stepping out of the box or by making an intentional movement while in the box. When this happens, the batter is out and runners return to their bases. All runners, not just the runner being played on. If the pitch was strike three, then the batter and the runner are both out. Now, if the catcher's initial throw retires the runner, the batter's interference is disregarded. So essentially, if the catcher still had the opportunity to throw the base runner out, we're going to ignore or disregard that batter's interference. Because of that, we really want to signal the interference, then wait for the play to unfold, and if we need to, at that point, we can assess the penalties that are appropriate. Let's take a look at some plays. Okay, so we have a batter swinging at a pitch with a runner stealing second base. And we're going to see that batter leave the box, and in the judgment of this umpire, that foot leaving the box has hindered this catcher's opportunity to make a play, and so we're going to signal interference. And that's done with that point there. So we're saying that's interference, and now we're waiting to see how this play unfolds. And when this initial throw doesn't retire the runner, we would assess that penalty for the interference. So let's take a look at this batter leaving the box and make sure that we understand that we're not simply penalizing the batter every time they leave the box. There also has to be some sort of interference with the catcher. The way I like to assess whether there's interference is, does the catcher have the opportunity to stride where he wants? And does he have that airspace in front of him clear? So in this case, the airspace in front of him may be clear, but you can see that the right foot of the hitter and the left foot of the catcher are getting very close to each other, which means that this catcher was almost certainly affected with the way he was able to stride into this throw. So leaving the box does not automatically result in interference unless we think the catcher is actually hindered in their opportunity to make that throw. So use the feet and the airspace to help you decide whether there was that hindrance.
Hey guys, real quick, I want to address a question that came up from several people. I'm going to go back and then go forward. A lot of people asked a very good question. Why does the concept of last time by not apply to the situation that I gave with the catch interference and the option, the coach taking the option? So the question was, for those of you who don't know what last time by is, it'd be a situation of, let's say there's a runner on first base, base it to the outfield, and the runner from first advances to third, or no, excuse me. The runner from third, better situation. There's a runner on first base, hit and run. So he's stealing the pitch. Fly ball to the outfield. As he rounds second base, he misses it. The ball gets caught. So now he's going to return to first base. And when he runs by on his way back to first base, he touches second base and gets back to first base safely. So they appeal second, saying he missed it on his way there. But the concept of last time by makes him legal because even though he missed second on his way to third, as he was retreating to first, he touched it again. So it's the last time he passed second base that is the question for the appeal. So it was a very good question. A lot of guys asked me about, all right, the runner left early from third base, and now you came out and enforced the catch interference, and that actually allowed that runner to go back and step on third base. So isn't that the last time by? That's a good thought. But you have to remember when you're dealing with the option with catch interference, you are talking about the result of the play. So the offensive manager has a choice to either accept the enforcement of the catch interference or to request the result of the play. Those are two separate, unrelated situations. So if he is taking the result of the play, it's as if the catcher's interference never happened. It's as if the umpire never awarded catch interference. It's as if the runner from third never went back to third because he was told to go back there by the plate umpire. So that's why last time by wouldn't apply, because we're bypassing that scenario in real life. So hopefully that helps to make sense to a couple people. As for the runners or the batter interference, we actually had this come up today. It drives me nuts when I hear people use the phrase delayed dead ball. There is no such thing in official baseball rules. I think they use that phrase in the National Federation of High School rule book, which drives me nuts. This is the closest thing to it that we'll have in a high school or in a college or professional baseball game, official baseball rules. It's not a delayed dead ball. All we're doing is pointing at and acknowledging that's interference. And if the catcher's initial throw does not retire the runner, then we simply enforce it. If it does retire the runner and the coach goes, what about the interference? Your response is, well, the interference is disregarded because the catcher's initial throw retired the runner. You can tell I said that once or twice over 10 years at umpire school, right? So that's a good, speaking of, that's something that Chris and I have been discussing throughout this whole call. Good thing to be in touch with is the rule book. You can never be wrong if you're quoting the rules in the rule book by the actual words in the rule book. So if you're using the words in the rule book, you can't be wrong. So there you go. Interference is disregarded because the catcher's initial throw didn't retire the runner. All right, so get into that rule book. Keep reading it. Every other time you have interference, it's an immediate dead ball. So we're going to kill a time that's interference. He's out, blah, blah. This is the only exception. You're just going to point because the ball may remain in play with the exception of one time, and that would be if it is the third strike on the batter. So if you have a 1-2 count, 2-2 count, 3-2 count, and you have interference after you swung and missed a strike there, you call it third strike. In that case, the batter's out for interference the batter's out on strikes and the runner's out on interference. So we call the ball dead immediately. It doesn't matter if the catcher's initial throw tires run or not. That's what I got.
Sounds great. Chris Marshall, you got something to add there?
Yeah, one trick that I learned over the years just in the application and how we can present this, because you know that a coach is going to come out and argue this. You're going to have discussion on this. So one little trick that I've used and I think is great and I'd love to share with all of you guys is once you go out on stage and you call your out, you send guys back and do all the stuff we've already talked about. As you retreat to home plate, go stand where that batter was. So when that coach comes out and wants to tell you that his batter was clearly in the box or he did this or did that, you can very nicely say him and professionally say to him, Coach, John, Jim, whatever his name is, I'm standing exactly where your batter was. Okay. So there's really no disputing him. It's not showing him up. It's not, being a smart aleck and giving him a smart response. It's being truthful and fair and honest with him and saying, this is where he was. This is what he did. And then quote the rule, like Chris said. And that'll make this much easier for you guys to explain.
Great stuff, guys. All right, so we're going to go on to fair foul.
Next up, we're talking about fair and foul balls. And an important question to ask ourselves is, how does a ball become fair? There's a couple different ways that we need to know and be able to explain. Those would be if a ball settles in fair territory. So a ball that comes to rest in fair territory is now a fair ball. A ball that lands beyond first or third base in fair territory is a fair ball. So this would be the ball that's hit down the first or third base line into the outfield, and it first lands beyond first or third base. That ball has become fair as soon as it touches the ground in fair territory. A ball that's touched by a fielder in fair territory is now a fair ball. And ground balls that pass over top of first or third base in fair territory have now become fair. So another couple important notes here. The plate is in fair territory, as is part of the batter's box. And we'll look at a diagram that's going to show us exactly what that means. And a ball can bounce from foul territory and become fair as long as it is in front of first or third base when that happens. So a ball that's chopped down into the ground and first lands foul may spin back fair, and it can become a fair ball if it meets any of these circumstances. Now, a ball that first lands in foul territory beyond first or third base is now a foul ball. One last important note, that a ball that hits the batter while they are in the box is a foul ball. So a ball that hits off the batter's foot, even though they may be standing in the fair part of the box, a ball that strikes that batter is going to be a foul ball. Here we see a nice depiction of this ball that's going to first land in foul territory and spin back fair and pass over first base. Let's take a look. First contact in foul territory, and then because it passes first base in fair territory, that is now a fair ball. I think this is a nice diagram that shows exactly where fair territory exists. Those foul lines are moving through the backside of home plate. That means that the entire plate is in fair territory. And you can see that those lines are also bisecting some of the front corner of both batters' boxes. So that area in the front corner of the batter's box is in fair territory, even if it's not marked off with the foul line that extends all the way to the plate. Last important note with fair foul decisions, the entire line which we call the foul line, is actually in fair territory. The entire line is in fair territory.
Three things. One, I actually worked with a guy a couple years ago who told me that a ball that rolled towards first base in foul territory and started curving towards first base and then hit the first base bag on the part of the base that is touching the first base line. So hopefully you guys can picture this. The side facing the first base dugout, not the front of it, but the side of it. He told me that that was a foul ball because it didn't pass over the front edge of first base. So I want to make sure that we're clear on this in case there's confusion. When Brian says it has to clear over the front of the bag, any part of the bag will make it a fair ball. So a ball that is in foul territory curving back towards first base and hits the side of the base that is touching the foul line is a fair ball. That touches the base. All right, that's one. Two, we used to do a thing in umpire school where we would take a baseball because the rule is, and I believe it's still the same in college, but we changed the interpretation of professional baseball, that if any part of the ball is over fair territory, that makes it a fair ball. Now, if you think about that, that means that if you take a baseball and you put it down as it comes to rest right next to the foul line, even though none of that baseball is touching the foul line, part of that baseball is still over the foul line. So we would actually have people walk around 360 degrees around the baseball that they come to a rest next to a foul line. And just because it is over the foul line, that would make it a fair ball. They have changed that interpretation for the purpose of instant replay because it's very hard to explain that to the general public that's never been to an umpire school or on one of these Zoom calls and listen to Brian tell them about what the rules are. And they look at slow motion replays and they see, well, that ball clearly didn't touch the foul line. How can that be a fair ball? And they don't understand the fact that the baseball is a sphere, which can have part of it over the foul line, even though it never touched it, which made it a fair ball. So they've changed that interpretation in Major League Baseball. I don't know if they changed it in college baseball. I don't know if they changed it in high school baseball, but just so you know, if that happens on TV, that's the reason why. Third, a little more history for you. Why is the ball a foul ball when the batter hits it off his foot in the batter's box? Well, the batter's box used to be entirely in foul territory. The front of the batter's box was actually midway through the home plate. All right? Then they moved the boxes forward. And when they moved the boxes forward, instead of the front of the box being midway through, the middle of the box is midway through, which caused the front portion inside of each box to be in fair territory, as Brian just showed you in the diagram with the foul lines. However, the foul lines are not drawn all the way to the plate. They are just drawn to the front of the batter's box. It is not possible to determine if a ball hits the batter's foot when it's in the box, whether or not that foot is in fair territory or foul territory. So the interpretation changed to if the runner or if the batter's foot has not touched the ground entirely outside the box, which means no part of his foot is touching a line that contains the batter's box, and his foot is not on the ground entirely outside the batter's box when he gets hit by a batted ball, we are just making a be-all, end-all, Band-Aid, cover-all situations. It is a foul ball. So there's your history for that right there, too. So that's why that's a foul ball. Hopefully that helps. I'm seeing Chris smile in the background here, so apparently that was a little something good. I don't know. All right, that's all I got.
Yeah, that was great stuff, Chris. So we're going to move on right now, and Brian's going to talk about mentality while handling situations.
So the reality with situations, like we talked about in the prior video, there's a lot of nuance and there's a lot of different elements that go into handling situations. And we can provide as much direction about when you should do this or when you should do that. But the reality is our mentality in a situation is going to inform our actions more than any prior training will. So we have to make sure that we're bringing the appropriate mentality into a situation. So let's talk about that a little bit. Here's our two key words: stubbornness and likability. Stubbornness and likability. These are two of the essential qualities to being an umpire. We have to be both stubborn and likable in order to be a complete umpire. And also essential to that is being able to employ those qualities at the correct times. So let's talk about when is good and when is bad for each of these qualities to come out. When is stubbornness good? Stubbornness is good when we're making the actual officiating decisions of the game. We want to be stubborn when we are deciding whether a pitch is a ball or a strike. Now, when is likability good? Likability is good when we're relating to people during all of the time between the actual officiating. So we've made a decision about balls and strikes. We were stubborn while we made that decision, and now we have to handle people in between those decisions. We should think about being likable for those opportunities. So when is stubbornness bad then? Well, stubbornness is bad when it lasts beyond the act of making those decisions. We need to think about being stubborn about the current call and be stubborn about the next call. But don't be stubborn about the prior call. That's done. We've made our decision. We made a good, stubborn decision about it. And what happens is we allow our stubbornness to affect how someone is going to challenge us about that call. We've already made it. There's nothing else to prove. Let's let that go and focus on being stubborn for the next situation. Now, when is likability bad? Likability is bad when we let it bleed into our decision-making process. So when we try to make people happy with our calls, we're allowing an outside influence to affect us. So let's go back to this strike zone that we talked about in week 2. As we know, we all bring a zone with us onto the field, some idea of what the strike zone is. We also bring with us a margin of error that surrounds that strike zone. If you are stubborn, you will call this zone with this margin of error all game long. A good stubborn umpire is going to be very consistent when it comes to defining the strike zone. As you let those outside influences, like the desire to be likable, bleed into your game, that's when we get the misses that are outside of our margin of error. And so we need to work hard to reduce our desire to be likable when it comes to making the actual officiating decisions. So we've talked about stubbornness and likability and when they're good and bad, but let's talk about how we can train ourselves to be better at each of them. And one of the ways we reinforce stubbornness is through good umpire training. When you can build that strong base of fundamentals through training, you have something to rely on. You have a base of fundamentals that you can stand yourself up and say, I can be stubborn because I know that I'm doing these things correctly. That's very helpful when it comes to maintaining that stubbornness. Seeking out feedback, that continual calibration of our actual officiating to make sure that what we think is correct is actually correct. I can feel much better about my strike zone and going out and being stubborn about my zone when I've gone back and checked out pitches from prior performances. So when I know, yes, I'm defining the outside corner correctly because I've checked those pitches, that helps me to bring that stubbornness with me. Now, last but certainly not least is positivity about ourselves. We are in a sea of stress as baseball umpires. There's a lot of stuff flying around us that makes it hard to be positive about what's going on. When we can reinforce our confidence through positive self-talk, I am a good umpire. I am a good umpire. Simple as that. That helps to bolster that stubbornness that's necessary to actually officiate the game. How do we reinforce likability? Well, for me, something that's been very helpful is taking a service-minded approach to the game. Not walking onto the field thinking about how can I be the best umpire, but how can I serve this game the best? right? Now, when we have that approach, that service-minded approach, it tends to help us relate to people in a more positive way. We can also reinforce our likability by understanding the roles that we're playing on the field. So if you are personally offended when someone questions your strike zone, it's going to be hard to be likable. Recognize that arguments are a part of baseball. It's a beautiful part of baseball. Fighting over the strike zone, the battle for that strike zone, is the center of baseball itself. And people are going to try to push you and prod you. But the reality is they're not pushing or prodding you, Brian DeBrouwer, the person. They're pushing and prodding the umpire. And when you can separate your personal feelings from the roles that are being played, it's a lot easier to maintain that sense of likability, because you're not going to be personally offended when they tell you that you missed the pitch. And really, we want to take this positive approach that we used with ourselves and apply it to how we deal with other people. So instead of saying, this coach is a jerk because they questioned me, let's have some empathy. Let's display empathy and say, I can understand why that coach is upset because, and we may not agree with them in a certain situation, but we can understand them and take some positivity into the way we approach them.
So I think a couple of really strong points here. Talking about likability, it all comes back to just being a good person, being a good crew guy, being a good person on the field, saying thank you, asking for baseballs would possibly please, and being a good guy on the field. We hear a lot of people talk about that, and then a lot of times some of us forget it as we get on the field and kind of get in the middle of the ball game. We forget that saying please and thank you can go a long way. Empathy is a huge point here. I think a lot of us lose sight of that also, that, everything means something in a baseball game to someone. And so having a little empathy there and understanding why possibly that coach has kind of lost his mind or has maybe starting off the deep end, maybe understanding why he's going in that direction. And then the other big thing to me is just being positive with yourself and believing in yourself and knowing that you're able to do what you've gone out there to do and do your job on the field. So we're going to move on to one more video here, and here we go.
So we've talked a lot about stubbornness and likability, but what's the end game that we're looking for? What do we want as an official when it comes to handling situations or dealing with people? Well, let's go back to a metaphor that we used in week 2, which is there are ropes tied to us that each team is going to use to try to pull us in their direction. And what we need to do is to try to cut those ropes so that we can remain neutral and do our job to officiate the game without those outside influences. The key is to maintain likability in the process of that. The things that we just talked about in terms of having a positive attitude about yourself and about other people, and trying to understand the roles and the motivations of the people that may be complaining to us or about us, that's going to help you to kind of stay above all that stress and maintain that likability. And I want to talk about one central thought that I'm always coming back to when I'm thinking about my reputation, and that is this quote by John Porter, who is one of my coordinators in college baseball and someone that I'm happy to have worked a lot with over the years, and that is, they have to want you to show up. So as an umpire, it's easy to put the uniform on and put on the hat and walk out there and think, I'm the man or the woman. And if you have that approach of people have to respect me because of the uniform, you're going to have a hard time. We need to win respect. We need to earn respect. Let's talk a little bit about dealing with friction and some of the things that we can do to kind of mitigate the effects that friction is going to have on our relationships with people. And I think that a big part of that is the reputation that you have built up to that point. So when we have these moments of friction, people are either going to say, gosh, I've always hated that guy, or I like this umpire, I can understand why they made this mistake. So you're either going to be forgiven or prosecuted based on what that reputation is that you carry with you. And you're constantly building that reputation, even when you think no one is watching. So when it comes to getting water from someone in between innings, do you snatch the water and turn your back to them as if they're serving you? Or do you share a friendly smile and say, thank you, and I appreciate it, and maybe chat about the weather or something like that? Taking advantage of those moments where you can humanize yourself and build this positive reputation is really going to help when we get to those sticky, friction-y points of any situation that we're in. So let's talk a little bit about making those deposits so that when we need to, we can take a withdrawal. And I'm going to send it over to a different video for a second, so stay tuned.
Emotional bank account with people. Hopefully yours is, quote unquote, has a lot of money. Like, I look at my emotional bank account with a lot of guys in this locker room. There's been a lot of deposits. And unfortunately, you guys don't get to see the deposits. And sometimes they're daily, sometimes they're weekly, sometimes it's one big one every 2 or 3 months. But most of the time, y'all see the withdrawals, which is okay. Because if you have somebody who's making deposits, whether it's, big, small, incremental, or whatever, when they make the withdrawal, there's, emotional credit to give out. So that's how I feel anytime he says or does anything. And, that's how I feel with a lot of my teammates is I get what you're saying. It doesn't matter how it comes out because I know you as a person and I trust you as a person. So whatever you need to say to get out of me the correction or, whatever happens in that moment, how it's communicated, that's okay with me because of prior deposits they've put into our friendship.
So let's ask ourselves, are we an umpire who makes deposits towards those relationships that we have with players and coaches, and partners would be another part of this that we'd want to consider as well. We've got to continually make those deposits through hard work and a positive attitude. And that way, when we get to a point where we need to make a little bit of a withdrawal, there's something there to withdraw from. Okay, we're going to transition now and talk a little bit about body language and the things that we can do that help us and hurt us when it comes to our body language on the field. Let's recognize first that every umpire, every official feels stress. We're in situations where there's pressure, whether it's pressure in an individual situation or whether that starts to grow a little bit larger. There's stress, and you're going to feel that, and how you respond to that is really going to define your success and whether you can be a productive umpire or official. And so what I very strongly believe is that when you've developed repeatable habits and really strong fundamentals, you're able to fall back on those things when you're feeling stressed. That's why we talked so extensively about putting on your mask, dealing with your indicator, dealing with baseballs. If you don't have a habit or kind of a plan for those things, when you start to feel stressed, that's going to be the moment that you don't take off your mask the correct way and you knock your hat on the ground, because you've added this extra bit of stress and you don't have a fundamental plan to fall back on. So work on those fundamentals. Have a routine for just about everything you do on the field. And that way, even when you're feeling stressed, you can maintain that outward appearance of calm. And when you have the outward appearance of calm, it helps to also calm you down internally. It's that old saying where if you want to be happy, smile. And when you smile, you start to feel happy. So you got to kind of fake it till you make it with some of these things, and having the ability to calm your body language is going to help calm your mind in those stressful situations. So let's talk about body language in conflict situations a little bit. We need to be able to stand tall and face the problem. And this doesn't mean that we're going to challenge people or try to intimidate them. But when we're faced with someone trying to pull that rope and get us to move towards their side, we have to, as officials, maintain that ability to stand up and be strong, even in the face of some sort of conflict or stress. Again, the key is to do that without becoming the aggressor. And we'll go back to remember the roles that people are playing. They're often not mad at you, the person. They're often mad at the umpire. So separate yourself and be able to handle these situations without being personally offended by them. I think something very important with body language is to be able to know the difference in walking towards someone to encourage an exchange of ideas. So when a coach doesn't like something on the field and wants to come out and talk about it, it's okay to approach them and kind of be seen as, I'd like to share some ideas with you. That's productive. It's telling them that I'm approachable. A difference is when they want to come out and fight, if they're yelling at us from the dugout and we start to kind of charge towards the dugout, move in their direction from the dirt circle, now we start to look like the aggressor in the situation. So we've got to be able to sniff out this difference in a discussion and an argument. And while we do want to face the problem and stand tall, we also don't want to charge towards arguments, because now it looks like we, as the official, are the aggressor. So let's talk about body language in between innings. So as the plate umpire, stand on the side you finish the play. If you've rotated to third base and we have an out that ends the inning, don't feel like you need to run all the way over to the first base side of the diamond. Stand on the side you finish the play. That's fine. If you finish the play in the middle of the diamond, so it's a swinging strike three or a fly ball where you didn't leave the plate area, then just follow the defense off the field, and that will put you near the offense to make it easier to tell them 2 more pitches or 1 more pitch before we get going. Now, what we do want to recognize that when there's conflict, make sure you're not inviting trouble by approaching the side of the conflict. So if the defense thought you squeezed them on a couple pitches in an inning and they were starting to challenge you on that, now we're not going to pick that side to go to, and we might work our way back across the diamond, even if it's less convenient. And the reason we want to do that is we never want to be seen as inviting trouble. And so if we stand near that side and they start to yell at us, the first question your supervisor is going to ask is, well, why did you put yourself on that side? The other reason you don't want to stand on the side of conflict is you're going to be facing towards the field watching the pitcher warm up, which means that all of that potential, all of those potential issues are now coming from behind you. And that puts you in a situation where when someone starts to say something, you've got to choose whether you want to turn around and address it or continue to face forward and deal with it coming from behind you. So when you put yourself on the opposite side of the field from conflict, now you're facing the pitcher warming up and you're facing that opposite dugout where you can see if someone chooses to lob some insults towards you. You can see who it was and you can choose without having to turn around completely to deal with it. All right, so let's give some closing thoughts on these mentalities that we have when we're handling situations. And as you've probably noticed throughout these 5 weeks, we like to teach with fundamentals or guiding principles or mantras, things that you can very simply remember. So from a mechanical standpoint, that would be stay chest the ball, use your eyes properly, watch the ball, glance at the runners. These foundational things that you can remember also can help when it comes to handling situations. So if there's one thing that I'm going to think about throughout this upcoming season when it comes to dealing with people, it would be to stay positive. Stay positive with myself, stay positive with my partners, stay positive with the players and coaches. That doesn't mean I'm going to be a pushover or let other people control the game when it's my job to control it. But I'm going to be positive in those interactions, and it's going to help me to be the best for myself and for the game. A bad mantra? Well, one of my least favorite things that gets thrown around for officials is that a good official goes unnoticed. The reason I don't like that is because sometimes a good official has to recognize that the game is demanding that we be noticed. So let's revise that phrase and say a good official goes unnoticed when there's nothing to be noticed for. When the game is smooth and easy, then yes, you should be in the background as an official. But you cannot be afraid to be noticed when the game demands it. I think that being able to step up and make what may be an unpopular call is an absolute essential when it comes to being a truly successful baseball umpire. I know that was a bit of a long presentation, so I do appreciate you sticking with it. So let's think about being stubborn and likable in the right situations and be positive out there. It's a tough game. If you stress yourself out, you're not going to have much fun.
So as we come to the end of this, I just want to take a moment to say thank you to all of y'all that have taken the time over this last 5 weeks to join us here with the United Umpires Workshop. Big thank you to Brian. I believe Alex is on here and is going to have a few words to say in closing for us. So, Alex.
Yeah, thanks, Todd. Just wanted to take the opportunity to thank everybody for being with us this last 5 weeks. Certainly a lot out there from a lot of great people. Thank you to Brian especially, but also Chris for joining us tonight and our whole team for being a part of everything that's gone on here. So I will say that if there is some interest in continuing your umpire education, please be on the lookout for all of our different continuing education opportunities. This was a 5-week, maybe 8 to 10 hour look at kind of the type of detail that we go into as a staff. And we would certainly love to see at a 2-man or a 3-man or a 2-umpire or 3-umpire opportunity here in the future. So join us at unitedumpires.org, macumpires.org. We'll throw some of those in the chat. And if you have an interest in being a part of the United family at any of our different locations, I know Derek will throw some information in the chat on how to get in touch with our staff. And thank you again. We really enjoyed it. We certainly will be in touch. I believe we've collected a number of email addresses and a lot of contact information, and we certainly want to reach out to all of you to get some feedback on what you thought. So be on the lookout for a Google form in that aspect. And if you would take the time to fill it out, we want to try to make this as good an opportunity for everyone as we can into the future. So with that being said, I appreciate it. And good night. Good luck this season, and have a good one.